Hello everybody, and welcome back to Higher Hertz. My name is Justin Lepridge, your online cello teacher, and welcome to part 2 as we go through the remaining songs of Suzuki Book 1. The Suzuki Book method is probably the most popular method for teaching music in the United States at least, and I'm sure around the world. It originates in Japan, and the power of its method comes from the wisdom of the ordering of the pieces. They all make a great sense as a progression in order to learn, starting with songs that are all in D major on the top 2 strings of the cello and working its way in complexity all the way to concertos by the time you get to the last few books out of 10 books, I believe, in this series. So Suzuki Book 1 is really the place to go for beginner rep, beginner classical rep, and even if you don't stick with the Suzuki method as far as what repertoire you learn, Book 1 is just such an excellent place to start. I think it's important to just go over these pieces. Now, what I mentioned in the last video is that we're going a little bit fast. You don't have to keep up with the pace that I'm going with it. That's just because we don't want to make 16 videos for this series. We just want to be able to make a couple. So slow things down, pause the video, come back to the video, and work on the pieces. They pretty much have fingerings. So if you were working on your D major scale and you're getting comfortable with where those fingers actually sit on the cello, and you're getting used to your sound and your bow production, all of these pieces should be very accessible to that skill level. All right, so far we've gone through the first 5 because we had Twinkle in its own video a few weeks back. So now we're up to number 6, O Come Little Children. So this one, like a couple back, is in 2/4, which is this 2 feel, and the marking is andante. What andante means is that it's like a walking pace. So we don't want to play this like a marching tempo. Dun, 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 dun. That's not really O Come Little Children. That's go fast, little children. So andante will be more like dun, 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 dun. Right? And as I mentioned in the other video, all of the fingerings in this book assume the open A string. The open A string can be a little bit difficult to sort of wrangle in musically, and while that does simplify the fingerings, just kind of know that, because it's important to get good at still controlling the A string, but also to realize that in a lot of situations later on, you're going to use an alternative fingering and finger an A here instead, because that's going to give you a lot more control over it. That's going to be the tendency. So don't kill yourself over the open A string. Try to recognize that this is, an introduction. And also musically, these songs are simple. So what we try to learn from them, and what I was mentioning a lot in the last video, is phrasing. So with this one, I've talked about the meter. You always want to start by looking over everything that's in the music. The music has most of what you need. And we can see really clearly that there are 4 4-bar phrases. They all end on a different note. I guess the first 2 are the same note. And they all have a very similar rhythmic feel, where we have bum ba bum bum ba bum bum ba bum bum ba dun 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 dun. So in the other video, again, we talked about how what this structure allows for is actually a pretty interesting story, even just within 16 bars, and depending on your definition of interesting. But you have an initial statement that's probably going to be a question in music, and formally it's known as the antecedent, and then the answer phrase is the consequent. So it's like, what comes before, and then what's the consequence of that? And you get an opportunity usually to go someplace a little bit further away emotionally in the third phrase before coming back to home, but usually having changed a little bit in the fourth. That's the story. That's pretty much the story we love to hear. You have a question, you go outside of your comfort zone a little bit, and you come back to it. That's what movies are anyway. So that's why even in these simple songs, that's the structure. And if we can start to work with that phrasing element is actually what makes music work, the more complex music work. So that's why we focus on it now. So let's go through this. And I'm going to go through the first song we're doing today slower, and we'll speed up a little bit as we go along. So if you want to follow along with me, you can get the bow out, and we're going to do up bow, which means going this way on the open A string. And you don't have to do the little skip. Everything can be done leaving the bow on the string, but what you want to do is really try to find a way that the bow itself is in the string, nicely in the string, and your hands relaxed in order to deliver that. You just want to find that easy way of moving the bow so that it's moving, as straight as if it were like perfectly precision technology, right? So then the next two notes are the third string on the D string, for third finger on the D string, F sharp, and then the open A string again. And then you put your fourth finger down, and it's going to be 4, 1, 1, 3. Optional little vibrato on the last note. One thing that's kind of nice to pay attention to in a song like this is the difference between an eighth note and a quarter note, because when you're playing an eighth note, it's almost implied that you might lift a little bit, that they're even a little extra short. By contrast, you want to make those quarter notes a little extra long. That's just going to help it sound like a final phrase, because when you finish talking, you don't usually just stop suddenly. Usually would stop short. But it slows down a little bit, or it holds out a little bit. So the second phrase is very, very similar. Let's try playing this first one again. And what I want you to think about with this is what's physically going on. All right, so we know what the notes are. We know that we want it to sound good, and you know that I've talked to you about good tone and what the scales and everything are. But let's just think for a second. Let's just take all that away. We have those two notes, and we're going to be like moving our arm. It's very circular, right? And one thing I think can be helpful is just like try to find the angle and the spot that's like nicest on the A string. And then independently try to then go to where you think the nicest spot is on the D string. And then your role is like, how do I connect those? In like one motion. How can it just be easier to do it than to not do it? It sounded like dreidel, dreidel, dreidel. But yeah, every time you notice what is going on in this piece, try to break it down to something like even simpler than what music is. Just this motion alone, because that is the physicality of playing the instrument. So if you're nailing that, then your technique is going to be good. That's kind of the secret to technique, is you just have to figure out mechanically how to do things. But the way that you make that more fun is you're like, well, how does my body engage with it in a way that makes sense? So like what I was mentioning with phrasing in the other video, you're going to want to make all of these bars a little different, and you're going to want to emphasize the notes differently within the bar. Typically the first beat of the bar is, gets more emphasis. Otherwise the ear starts to flip it and thinks beat 2 is the downbeat if you do it the opposite way. So, dum-ba, and that's why there's that quarter note there as well, compositionally. Okay, you see kind of how you start a little stronger, but maybe do a little bit softer of a sound on the second bar. So you can work on that. You can say, all right, there's my bold sound, and I know that it's bold because I really kept the bow in the string and swept on the way out. And then I'm going to have my sweeter one where I'm a little lighter and I float on top of the string a little bit more. So then those differences end up sounding like instead of the music was stale or just a little bit nasally or whatever, that it just sounds right, that it's sort of beautiful and helps you get carried away. So all of these notes should be different. And then that note comes back up, so you get that little question mark. So you don't have to decrescendo the whole way or get softer. That would be a little bit weird too. That would be like, you're like almost swallowing it. So you want to be able to ask the question. And one thing that I would do, so you can think about this if you've been practicing shifting at all, is to get that softer character on the second A, you could shift up the equivalent of 2 half steps. So putting your first finger where your third finger normally would be, and then get the A with the fourth finger that way. So that would look like this. So that could be something that's nice to kind of work on, because I think that sounds a little nicer. So let's do the second phrase. Now, what's the second phrase going to be? A second phrase is going to be a little bit more definitive than the first phrase. So maybe we give it a little bit more urgency there. That urgency is going to be tension that's left unresolved. So what do I mean by urgency? I mean by almost pushing the tempo, just staying on the front edge of the beat by giving a little vibrato to the more intense vibrato to that last note of the section. You could give more bow. You could bring the bow closer to the bridge. And these would all be ways of bringing more energy into the sound and more intensity to the music. The interesting thing about this second phrase is that it's exactly the same as the first phrase. So if it were really question and answer, you would kind of expect it to be but is not. It's F sharp again. So that to me implies that urgency. And this is what I mean about there's so much information in the music. So spend some time when you're practicing just going through and looking at it from different angles, because it will seem to you, most likely, because it's still, even to this day, will seem to me as though, oh, somebody was just out of tune, or oh, their note was whiny, or oh, they hit a imperfect sound. And I think all of that stuff is an incorrect assessment of what happens, because the cello is full of all of those things to begin with, like out of tune notes that are actually in tune, bad sounds that are actually good sounds. The only way to know is context. So I think the only real failures, assuming that your technique is in place and mostly working for you, is a lapse in knowing what you were trying to get musically. And what I mean by musically are these things about where the phrase is going, what it means that, it's the same phrase twice. That's actually how you decode how to make it sound good. So if you give that second phrase that more urgency because you've figured out, oh, well, this is going to be more tense because it's just the same thing twice, people feel that and they're like, oh, that makes sense then that it was twice. There's definitely ways to play music where you start to question, did the composer know what he was doing? But it's actually just the performer failing to be able to speak it properly. So anyway, I've been talking a little long. So let's finish out this song. The third phrase goes to a different place. So we finally do a different note than this A. First finger on the D string. 4, 3, A string. 1. And there they've actually put in the music the diminuendo that I would have said is implied in that first phrase. So, and they also put in the forte on that final phrase, which again is what I was saying about you're going to come back stronger. You're going to come back better when you get to that fourth phrase in music. So some of these things that are marked are things that in a way would have been implied anyway. But the point of marking them is that they are the most important musical things to get. But that's why, the difference between mezzo forte in the beginning and the forte at the end, that's why there's a difference there. It's not just to be annoying when teachers ask you, why is that different? What really is the difference between mezzo forte and forte? Well, the difference is in this song is just generally medium loud, but it's going to end up in a place that's definitely loud. And the reason it's going to do that is it says the same frickin' sentence twice. It really wants to be able to say it. And when it comes back, it's definitive that it wants to say it. So some of these, it sounds kind of silly to be giving this song character like that, where the song either wants or doesn't want things. But man, I tell you, the more you allow yourself to be silly like that, the easier it is to figure these things out in the music. All right, so let's keep going through some of these songs. Number 7 is called May Song. We're in the key of, these are all in the key of D. We're in a common time. And they never write 4/4 in this book. They always write C for common time. Allegro means fast, basically. Moderato means moderately. So it's kind of interesting to compare Allegro moderato to the andante we had before. Andante is like a speed you would walk, whereas Allegro moderato is to some extent, I think, a faster tempo being held back. Whereas a walking tempo is always you're never going to want to have to walk too fast. That just feels unnatural. So that's again one of those things where, what is the difference there? And sometimes if you just try to look at it as a spectrum of soft to loud or slow to fast, these markings, you're going to miss out a little bit on the purpose of them. Like originally music was actually only notated with piano or forte, and it became something of a innovation among composers to do the mezzo thing or to do the, two Fs or two Ps. But, there's basically just this sense that you're either the main thing that's going on or you're kind of more subdued. And all of the gradations around that are these differences. But it's helpful maybe to just keep that in mind, that there's a way to look at it too where it's a little bit more binary, like on, off, that sort of thing. So what we have in this one is we're starting to jump around a little bit more. This starts with an arpeggio, just going up. But if you've been practicing your D major arpeggios, then you're going to be all good to go for this one. And otherwise, we just have maybe one additionally complicated rhythm. We have this dotted rhythm, which just means to hold 1 1/2 times the value of the note. So if you see a dotted quarter note, that's going to be the equivalent of 3/8 notes. So you can count that. 1, 2, 3. And then that half note, that's the equivalent of 4/8 notes. So that's how we're gonna think of these rhythms. We're just gonna count. We're thinking if this is in 4, but we can count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and those are the eighth notes. So of those eighth notes, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. All right, and what we've already have there is actually kind of a question answer phrase. So I don't know if you heard that, but that was like a very clear question and answer phrase. We have something that ends on A, and if you watch the previous video, A is the dominant key chord in the key of D, which is the key that we're in. So we're going to see a lot of A on those question phrases because that's what makes it feel like it needs to resolve to D in the first place. We have 12 bars here. So let's see what's going on. Let's do some investigative work because when you get the music out, I know it's hard to just sit there and like look things over. So let's assume we've played for the first plays. Let's see what comes next. All right, we're softer. We've started on A. So that's also something you should note, right? This is starting off question. And then it's going to piano. So this middle section is really going to try to like take us down to a low place, kind of make us feel sad, I think. Let's see what happens. And when it does things like that, I think it's great to just like take a little bit of extra time. So like just hook there. And then if you do that and you're playing with an accompanist, you'll have to re-cue. So it's good to just practice that to begin with. When you cue, you just lift up your shoulders and arms a little bit and you settle into the note. And they want us to repeat, and they even say second time poco rit. They don't put poco rit at the end of that middle phrase, but I think it's okay. You have my permission at least. If you start studying with somebody and then they tell you not to, then, you can only appeal to authority so far, right? All right, guys, so that is May's song. Let's keep going just for the sake of being able to show you guys what all of these are. So next we have Allegro. They have no need to put a tempo marking because we already know that Allegro means fast. We have an interesting marking where we have both a dot, which means separate, shortened, but it doesn't have to mean super short. And we have a line, which is also known as a tenuto, and that means that we're going to play long. So basically what this marking is just trying to say is don't be too short. The dots don't mean that we go, just still have length to the note, just cut it off. So if you want to be really exact about this, you could think about 3 16th notes. So if those are 16th notes. So just think 3 of those and go off. If you wanted to try to be exact about it. But I also think that might miss the point a little bit because there still should be a smoothness. So leave the bow on the string. So many of the same things we've already talked about. They're continuing to make it a little bit, like faster. This is already a faster tempo. We have the eighth notes in there, but you can hear it's like pretty much the same as the previous tuned, we started on the high, or well, I guess it started with an arpeggio, but we had this thing that went down to A, then this thing that goes down to D. They even put a comma in there so that we know it's the end of a phrase and we're going to start again. All right, so we have a second iteration. All right, so now we've approached the B section. I always call it the B section. When we get to more complicated pieces like concertos, it's going to be known as the development. It's going to be something that develops what's going on. So this even says dolce. What dolce means is sweet. It means sweet in Italian. I know there's so many music terms. I really highly recommend you go look up a list and familiarize yourself. But definitely the most important thing is just when you encounter something, look it up and then memorize it through usage. I think that's the easiest way rather than having to study. This doesn't have to be like school. In fact, I made music too much like school when I was younger and I suffered for it. You have to figure out what's going to be musical. And sometimes it's like a magic trick. It's like not what you think behind the scenes to get it to happen. Like the thing about, we're going to play the A, with a sweeter character. Like remember a couple songs ago? That sort of stuff, you don't hear that in the audience. You just hear it as music. So anyway, let's keep going. So we have the dolce section. So what do we do to be dolce? Can do a little vibrato if we've been practicing that, but otherwise we're going to be closer to the fingerboard. We could even roll the bow back a little bit so we're using fewer hairs, and we're going to be light. And that lightness and that sensitivity is what's going to cause the sweetness. Oh, and the other thing is to make sure that you are being totally smooth here. So let's be smooth, and let's just follow a simple rule. We're going to play louder if we're higher in pitch and softer if we're lower in pitch, just a little bit. You see how just that simple rule about volume actually helps make the music possible. And also the reason for that is because it's good. The composition is good. It already has that information embedded in it. That the high point of the phrase, if you just were thinking about where you're going to want to do it anyway, that's the highest note. So that's what good composition is as well, is knowing those sort of things. All right, and then we, as we've done with so many of these, we play the first theme again. Wonderful. All right, guys, let's keep going. Let's just do one more for this video, and then we will pick up in part 3, hopefully finish out the book. All right, so we have this piece called Perpetual Motion. So everything that they've been doing rhythmically so far in this book has kind of been building up to this moment where we have faster notes and different rhythms, and now we just have a piece that's only eighth notes. So that's why it's called perpetual motion, or like motion that never stops. You never have a quarter note, you never have a rest. It's only going to be these eighth notes. And nonetheless, one of the things that kind of makes it easy is there's a lot of repeated notes, and we're basically just playing a scalular pattern. So if you've been practicing, if you have the Mark Yampolsky book and you've been practicing the variation on scales where you go, then you're pretty much already set for this one. So let's take it slow, and then we're going to make it fast because it says allegro, and let's see what their other markings are. It's very important to look at all the markings. So they say, play this piece in the middle of the bow using a very short stroke, stop the bow after each note, play slowly at first and then gradually build up. Okay, that's definitely what we're going to do. So the whole stopping at the end of the note thing is literally like that. Stopping, but still being able to be on the string. So not stopping that way. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to put a little bit of space in between each note, and middle is definitely good for this. One concept that I don't know if I've talked about in these videos yet actually is the balance point. So the balance point of the bow, because the frog is heavier, is not like in the center there. It's like 2/3 of the way through. So this is going to be like an important point to like realize is like the actual like center of the tension on, or the weight of the bow. So that's the reason for the reason for middle of the bow being kind of here. So we'll do, put our first finger down, and one thing that makes this an even better exercise is if as soon as you're done, you put your next finger down. that's going to really help you when we speed this up, because then you've already know how to play that quickly. So, sorry, I got distracted because I was thinking how they do put a pause in here. Compositionally, it works because these last two notes are not the same. Notes are never the same in classical music. So when we play this fourth bar, it could just be a quarter note there, but then it wouldn't be the perpetual motion. So I would posit that the second D is actually a pickup to the next phrase. So you could put a little comma in the music there, but you're going to play. But that's how it's going to work, and you're going to be able to lift off that note. You can like go a little short and then use a lot of bow. Really kind of pop off there. That's really cool. So that's their little trick here. And I noticed it before too. They have all of these doubled notes. They're always at the end. So it's a little deceptive. There are moments of breath in this, even though it's perpetual motion. So I would say it would be probably a good idea to practice to this. So that's the end of that second phrase. Now we're at the bridge at this point. And because of the way that they've printed this, it's not as obvious. So I just wanted to point that out, that this last bar of the third line is the beginning of the B section. So that's a nice, interesting moment where the repetition doesn't sound like increased fervency. It just sort of happens to work as its own resolution phrase. It's almost like a palindrome that way, because those are like the same bars, but they work together. They work together really nicely. And what you really want to do in these moments is again, follow that rule about the higher in pitch you're going, the louder you're playing just a little bit. That's how you phrase these lines. They're built that way. I mean, even just that is that sort of like question, twice as long answer sort of setup that we've seen time and time again with the phrasing of these. So, 1, 2, 3. And then we do that again. So I would say relax when you get to that second part. Allow more bow to exist. You want to just feel like that you're swimming in the sound at that point. Whereas the first one can have that fervor. The second one is a resolution. So now we have the final 4-bar phrase. And then I hope you can still hear how there's those little pickups in there. But obviously it's not a pickup to anything at the end. So we'll do, we'll do the second one a little bit softer, especially for the last two notes. All right, that one was super fun to go through. They actually have a couple of variations. So that's, again, why I recommend getting the book and being able to follow along. Just practice this, man. It's just repertoire. Set yourself 10 minutes and just do it. Progress at, whatever pace you want to. I think there's 16 songs in this book, so let it take you 16 weeks. Or 32. 2 weeks for every one. But, just try to get there. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to continue this in the next video, try to continue out the Suzuki book. Hope you guys have been enjoying this lesson, as I hope we've been enjoying all our lessons. If you have any ideas for songs you'd like to learn or things that you've been having trouble with in your practicing, let us know and we'll try to help you out. Once again, my name is Justin Leppard, and this has been a production with Higher Hertz. We'll see you guys in the next video.